We shall not cease from exploration. And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Through the unknown remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning.
Duncan, thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, happy to chat. Looking forward to it.
I discovered your work through Substack, and I just was really fascinated that you do woodworking and chocolate making is what I saw, and I just thought that that was so cool because I like it's just something that I don't see very often anymore. And I mean, I know that it obviously is still happening, and just to get to talk to someone who like that's their thing, I just was like, I need to do this. Like this is such a cool episode to do.
Yeah.
So kind of starting off, could you just talk a little bit about the artisan stuff that you do and like the processes that you go about making what you make?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I guess I like definitely have maybe a bit of an eclectic, yeah, kind of skill set. Yeah, I guess like with the chocolate, I guess that was like a previous career. Yeah, I think worked in the chocolate industry, I guess like in the early 20 aughts, for a couple of different companies doing, it was kind of early on in what was called like bean to bar chocolate making. So basically, rather than starting from finished chocolate and making kind of truffles and confections, what's
Mhm.
it like to actually start from the raw cocoa bean that's been fermented and dried, usually in whatever country grew it, and then basically turning it into chocolate. Yeah, it was a really cool kind of time to be in that. I think it was, yeah, a lot of fun experimenting and just trying to figure out, yeah, I don't know, how to solve cool problems. Um, yeah, and then I guess separate from that, kind of years later, got into woodworking. Um, yeah, and I think I had a similar process of started in more kind of just traditional woodworking, starting from like lumber that you'd get at like a hardwood store and making furniture. And then more recently, I've been getting into what's called greenwood chair making.
Mhm.
So starting from like a fresh log and then splitting all your parts out and then kind of shaving them with a draw knife into chair parts to kind of get to a finished product. And I guess maybe like the theme in both of them is a lot of kind of just going further and further back in the process of like, okay, well, it's fun to do chocolate or make furniture, but like, where do your raw materials come from? Kind of where does this process really start if you keep following it backwards? Yeah, I guess I keep maybe doing that over and over when I get into something, that kind of just following it back as much as possible. It's fun to kind of learn really where things start, I guess, is maybe the theme there.
Yeah, that is kind of what I was the theme I kind of got, I think, from just seeing your different work is that kind of interconnectedness of maybe the philosophy that drives you to do what you're doing and make what you're making. And something I read a couple of your Substacks that you had posted just like talking about your creative process and you were describing that. And so could you talk a little bit about how you describe your creative process, especially with woodworking?
Yeah, totally. I th- it's interesting. I think like there's a lot of like advice. I think maybe early on, if you're starting to look at trying to get into woodworking, I
Mhm.
feel like it is really common for people to suggest like, oh, find a specific style that you're interested in, like, and then maybe kind of start copying some of those designs until you kind of start learning and finding your own voice. And I guess I'm really bad at following plans and never good at making plans when I start woodworking projects. And so I think kind of early on when I was learning more, it was a lot of just like, I don't know, having like a vague idea in my head and really just starting, with wood, how do you start putting these things together and kind of get to where you want to go. And I think especially it maybe wasn't the most efficient way to learn when you don't quite know how to solve a lot of those problems, but I think it was really fun. And I think it really has influenced kind of my current kind of way of making. I think especially with chairs, I think a lot of what I do is have maybe a vague idea or kind of a general of like, oh, I want a side chair or an armchair, and then, kind of make one usually without a whole lot of a plan, just kind of based on kind of angles and numbers and sizes that, I know generally will fit. And
Mhm.
then from there, it's like a lot of iterating. So it's like, okay, I made the one chair. Okay, I really like where it hits me on the back, like, and the angle that it is, but I'd be curious what it'd feel like on the front edge of the seat if, if this shape was different. Yeah, and so then it's a lot of kind of, taking that design and making like slight iterative changes to it, kind of over a bunch of different chairs or something like that. And it's really fun because I feel like it's been a good way, I don't know, to really like experience different feelings because
Hmm.
it's interesting with chair making because I feel like you're so much more in contact and intimately interacting with that piece of furniture than a lot of things. And so I think even beyond just the like visually seeing what a piece of furniture looks like, I think you can kind of understand if you like or don't like something. But then if you add that additional layer of comfort on top of that, I think it just adds a lot of kind of nuances to design. And I think it's
Hmm.
been really nice of just trying a lot of things because even if something makes sense or seems like it would be comfortable in your head, it's like until you sit in that chair for, I don't know, a couple dozen hours, you don't
Yeah.
really kind of know all the little, I don't know, little things that make it comfortable or uncomfortable. And so I think that kind of iterative process has been really helpful in just like getting to sit in a lot of different chairs and really feeling of like, all the things that are comfortable and maybe what make the chair comfortable to sit in for, I don't know, 20 or 30 minutes compared to what would make it comfortable, for like 2 or 3 hours.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's just, yeah, kind of been fun to, I used to, yeah, try a lot of things and kind of, in real life and physically kind of experience it and see how it kind of then feeds back into designs.
Hmm.
For new chairs. Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah, that's super interesting how, I mean, the whole process is, like you're saying, very iterative. Like you don't just, I don't know, have like the idea in your head and then the first one you make is successful and it's just like constantly remaking and remaking. Um, Now, I've I always joke with people like any sort of craft or work that I have to do with my hands is like the worst kind of art for me to do personally because I'm just not very good at it. So I've always been like more like the drawing, painting, writing kind of person. And so like from my perspective, I find one of like the big things I was wondering while I was just like looking at what it is that what you're doing with your woodworking is like where does your inspiration come from that kind of gives you the ideas to like maybe the original inception idea of like, hey, this is what I kind of want to do with this season that's coming up of woodworking. And then from there, like how do those ideas turn into that iteration process where, you create the one and then it goes on to the other and the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's kind of been like a process of building, and in some
Hmm.
ways recently, the last probably couple of years, with chairs, a lot of kind of like building complexity. I think at first it was the kind of the first bunch of chairs I made were all like relatively simple, just dining chairs. And that's a little bit of just added complexity that those were the chairs we needed. I think I
Hmm.
was replacing a lot of the furniture in our house with things I was making and had replaced most things except, the chairs. And so we needed, a new set for the dining table. And so I think that was kind of what guided, at least generally, like, okay, want to make dining chairs. And then I think kind of the specific kind of maybe style that I started on there was
Hmm.
I kind of partially influenced by so I have like an all hand tool shop.
Hmm.
Um, like I don't have any power tools and initially that was kind of just out of necessity. I think I
Hmm.
usually had a really small space to work in and was moving pretty often. And so having a big equipment just wasn't really achievable or kind of doable for me. And so kind of just had a hand tool set up. And so I think that kind of guided me down this path of these specific style of chairs that are really conducive to hand tool woodworking and are relatively efficient to be made with hand tools.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I think that was kind of the combination of kind of making, they're often kind of referred to as like stick chairs, or often like vernacular styles of chairs that, you kind of see the world around that kind of are guided, I think, in the past, again, by people having simple sets of tools and how do you solve these problems. Um, yeah, and so I think that was kind of where it started, and then yeah, worked kind of on those simple dining chairs for a while, and then kind of started branching out into maybe more just for kind of interest and excitement of kind of big cone backs, which are chairs with like a bigger, higher back and like an armrest. They're a little bit more loungy and kind of more for hanging out. Um, yeah, and I think that was just more kind of being drawn to that form and being curious about, yeah, how do you increase the comfort, and then how do you kind of just bring these additional elements into the chair making? Um, yeah, so I've been kind of working through those for a little while, and then I think just recently, I think at the moment I'm working on a bunch of what are called post and rung chairs. So these
Hmm.
are yeah, kind of, they typically have like a woven seat. So they have like an open framework. It's just two front posts for the legs and then two rear posts that are a single piece up into the backrest that are
Mhm.
held together by rungs, hence the name post and rung. Um, and that's interesting because it's like a very different method of construction, and so it is interesting kind of coming to these same types of problems of comfort and like kind of the necessities of chair design, but having to figure out these completely different ways to solve them, which has been fun. And I guess so much of chair making is kind of like a weird gateway into fun geometry, trying to
Mhm.
get all these things to line up through space, and then how do they mesh with the human body. So that's maybe a roundabout way to at least answer part of that question.
Yeah, definitely.
So
Um, so you were saying about that you have like the one man shop and you do all the making and the creating of your chairs yourself. Is this like your main career or is it more of like a side thing that you do?
yeah, I guess I have a bit of an eclectic yeah, maybe professional life at the moment. So I do a couple of things. I help run a folk school in my town called
Hmm.
Tarweed Folk School. So yeah, we do a lot of like craft, common place-based skills, traditional skill classes. So a lot of like basket weaving, woodworking, natural dyeing, and a lot of stuff like that. So yeah, help run the school as well as I teach there occasionally, both some chocolate making classes as well as woodworking classes.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I think yeah, and then make and try and sell some chairs. Yeah, and then kind of in addition to that, I also am a chemist, kind of by training, so I still do that kind of work for myself, kind of doing consulting for some life sciences companies. So
Okay.
kind of a lot of different
Yeah.
pieces, kind of to put an income or life together. So I would certainly love to do more chairs. I think it's a little tricky trying to find, I think, a market for,
Yeah.
kind of nice high-end furniture. But yeah, I think kind of slowly starting to build a little bit more of that into life. So that's kind of the goal, at least to get a little bit more of it.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's
yeah.
really cool. I mean, that there's like so many different aspects of what you're doing, like with the teaching and with the woodworking, and then also with the life sciences. Like that's just a very cool, I think, trinity of things going on together. Could you talk a little bit more about that folk school that you were telling about or saying about?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So yeah, it's called Tarweed Folk School. Yeah, and folk schools, they have like a long tradition. They initially started in Denmark in the 1800s. And yeah, basically it was as Denmark was transitioning from a monarchy to a democracy for the first
Hmm.
time. And I think there was this big gap, and essentially there was no kind of access to education for the lower classes. It was really only for, kind of the wealthy people who could access education. And so I think it was this movement to try and democratize education and bring it essentially to everyone. Um, yeah, and kind of in a way that was kind of skill sharing among the community.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think kind of trying to help build community. And so I think it was often kind of credited, at least in some part, in helping contribute to that successful transition to democracy because of the community building and kind of sense of identity that came through that kind of collective learning and sharing of knowledge. And so generally, I mean, folk schools are cool because I think they can be such a broad set
Hmm.
of things because it's so kind of community driven and grassroots. And so, there's folk schools that really focus specifically on things like, music or different
Hmm.
types of dance, kind of any sort of craft, yeah, anything like that. And so I think it's a much stronger tradition kind of in Scandinavia and that area, but there is kind of more and more kind of things in that model kind of in the US every year. And so, yeah, so like I said, ours really kind of focuses on, yeah, kind of place-based skills and kind of craft. And so, yeah, kind of a lot of the classes I mentioned before. And yeah, I think a lot of what we try and do is I guess build community and really are trying to encourage people to kind of share their knowledge and skills kind of freely and openly with the community,
Hmm.
beyond just the folk school. Yeah, so yeah, it's a really cool group of people. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds
So
really awesome. I mean, I haven't heard too much. I've heard about the concept before, but I didn't know that there was like different schools for different kind of branches of like the arts and all that kind of thing. So when you got involved with that, did you kind of come in with the interest of education or the interest of what you do with your woodworking and like artisan? work? How did you get involved with the school at first?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it was more, I think kind of I like moved back to Oregon yeah, I guess almost 2 years ago, and it was kind of just had a bunch, or yeah, a mutual friend was one of the folks who helped start the school. And so I think it was just kind of spending time with them woodworking. Yeah, and then I think taking a few classes. And I guess it was more just interest in kind of that community, and I think kind of I don't know. I was interested in kind of being able to kind of share craft and like
Hmm.
do craft with others. I guess that, yeah, I think the educational part is interesting to me, but I think what's really appealing is kind of just the shared experience of like people creating and problem solving kind of together.
Hmm.
I think teaching is often like an avenue to do that. But I think that, yeah, the cool thing about folk schools is that it can be more than that. And I think, you know, certainly bigger projects that we haven't quite gotten to yet, but I think in the future would really like to have more of a kind of support structure for artisans and craftspeople trying to
Hmm.
explore more of whatever kind of interesting kind of little niches or kind of specialty areas they're interested in, and how they can do that and learn more in those areas. So yeah.
And so is that targeting like a like more of a younger audience or like a collegial level audience or maybe just like anyone in general?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really trying to be open, or it is open to everyone. And I think the goal is to get as many people engaged as possible.
Hmm.
I think our kind of demographics probably skew, kind of college age and adults.
Hmm.
I think it is really fun though. I think I was teaching a class, I guess the end of last year that I think, yeah, it was folks in college, so in their kind of early 20s, and then, one guy in his 70s, and kind of a bunch of people in between. So I think it is really cool to get kind of this intergenerational group of people
Hmm.
together. I think it kind of just is a lot of fun conversations and interesting perspectives from such a broad kind of range of people. And I enjoy it just because it's like I don't often get to maybe interact with people much
Hmm.
younger or that much older than me. And so I think it is, yeah, a cool way to kind of interact with communities that I might not otherwise kind of, spend a lot of time with. And so I think I really appreciate that part of it.
Yeah. So what kind of people like do you see coming in there most often? Is it just people who like they have been interested in the arts in general, or they like are looking for something new? Like what's the kind of audience that's appealing to?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good mix. I think there's definitely a lot of people kind of just casually are curious about, whatever skill it is. Like maybe they just thought it'd be cool to try weaving out. And they may not have an intentions of getting super into it, but they just wanted to try it out and maybe make the specific thing that the class is geared towards. Yeah, and so it's kind of some folks like that, and then definitely a pretty good cohort of people who are really interested in going deeper, and I think
Hmm.
often see these classes like a springboard or kind of a starting point for new skills that they then, want to expand on and kind of continue learning. And I think it has been really cool. I think there is like a large group of people I meet through that who really just love learning new
Hmm.
things, kind of regardless. Like they just want to kind of expand their horizons and learn new skills. Even if they're not going to become experts in it, they just want a basic understanding and common knowledge of those things. So I think there's a lot of diversity there, and I think it is really cool to see kind of, yeah, I guess the amount of kind of curiosity that it does spark in people. I think it has been really fun when maybe someone comes in either maybe because a partner or a spouse signed them up for the class, or they
Hmm.
got talked into doing it and are kind of maybe not so sold on it, but then I think once they kind of spend a few days or a few weeks working on something like a woodworking project, um and they get really excited about it, and then they kind of start asking those questions of like,
Hmm.
well, if I wanted to do this, what tools would I need, or like where should I start looking for these things? I think that's really exciting to kind of see, yeah, kind of that passion, kind of at least maybe the inklings of it starting to
Hmm.
start in people, I think is always really fun. And definitely part of it that I appreciate. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So when did that inkling kind of start in your life, if you can remember? Was it just always there, or did it kind of grow over time?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess probably I don't think it was something that I always had. I think probably when I was quite a bit younger, I enjoyed making things, but I maybe didn't so much enjoy kind of sharing those experiences and
Hmm.
skills that I was perfectly happy to do it on my own. And then I guess it was probably like when I was working in for a few different chocolate companies, And then kind of training new employees was maybe one of the first times I really started kind of seeing some of that. I think that
Mhm.
was one of the times when, new employees that maybe didn't have much of an understanding of where chocolate came from or how it was made, and then kind of getting to share that process with them and watching their excitement, kind of in their realization or understanding of how much more there is to this process than they understood previously, I think is probably where it started. Yeah, and I think it probably has kind of just grown slowly from there. I think like when I went to grad school for chemistry, and so taught, that whole time. I think that kind of, you know, was maybe the most kind of formal kind of educating of other people I kind of participated in. And I think that kind of showed me kind of that as well. I think that was maybe when I really started understanding of how do you get people interested in something
Yeah.
they might not otherwise be interested in. And I think like being able to do that, I think is fun to me too, of like, okay, how can you find the way that this new skill or this knowledge that they might not otherwise care about, how do you figure out how to show them that it's going to impact their life or can be a useful knowledge for them? And I guess maybe that challenge is part of the, I don't know, interest in it as well. It's kind of a fun thing to try and do, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Well, also too with like with woodworking in particular and like that craftsmanship side of things, when did that inspiration kind of come around? Was that earlier, or was that also just like a more recent thing that developed?
yeah, I guess I've always really liked making my own things. I think I'm like very, I guess maybe particular about how I want things to be. And so I didn't start woodworking until much later in life. But I think early in life, I, was really into things like knitting like
Hmm.
my own clothing. Or for a long time, I got really into sewing a lot of my own like backpacking and bike packing gear. Um, like making my own sleeping bag and backpack and kind of bike bags and stuff like that. And so I think kind of throughout life, I had a lot of, I guess, really enjoyed those types of skills of where it's like I could custom make myself these things
Hmm.
to solve particular problems like in that exact way, I wanted it to be. And then I guess even back then I also enjoyed that iterative process of, you make one of the thing and kind of see how you can improve on it. Um yeah, and then actual woodworking, wasn't until it's maybe 5 years ago.
Hmm.
So I feel like in woodworking terms, I'm still a baby. I feel like so many people have done it, for so long. But yeah, I think it really started. I had a bunch of like old IKEA furniture that had moved back and forth across the country. So, it was really starting to fall apart. And I wanted to start replacing it with, kind of nice furniture, but didn't really have the disposable income to
Hmm.
kind of, buy the quality of furniture that I wanted. Um, and so I think, kind of slowly started, replacing kind of simple things like the, coffee table, bedside tables, and those types of things. And then so I think really just generally enjoyed all of woodworking. Yeah, and I think it was kind of that thing where, replaced most of the furniture except the chairs. And so then figured it was probably worth, making some chairs. And I think once I kind of started on that, I really, I guess, kind of fell in love with that process specifically within woodworking.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think I've really kind of, gone down the chair rabbit hole. I think, in the chair world, people often refer to as, a bad case of chair disease, where you just like have all these ideas and all these things you want to make. So I think, definitely still do. So other woodworking occasionally, but I think a lot of what I make these days, most of what I make these days is chairs. So um, yeah,
Cool. I do really kind of want to talk a little bit more about the chocolate side of things because I just find that so interesting. Like, what does that world look like? You were talking about that kind of trend that was going on where it was like, what did you bean to bar?
yeah.
Okay, yeah, and like, so what is that? What did that world look like whenever you were in it? And kind of I don't know what drew you to that, and what was the space like?
Yeah. I'm definitely maybe a little out of touch with, or not as kind of plugged into that world these days, but I think kind of in the, I guess, in the late 90s and early 2000s, most chocolate was produced by just a handful of major manufacturers.
Hmm.
I can't remember the exact stat, but I think it was like 5 companies made, the majority of the chocolate consumed in the US. So these huge giant companies buying, metric tons of beans kind of on the commodity market and converting them to chocolate that then, gets sold to companies that would make them into confections and everything else. Yeah, and then I think kind of, yeah, I think it was in the early 2000s. Yeah, a few companies came along that were kind of interested in like, how do we kind of do this on a small scale? And they would kind of start making direct relationships with farmers in kind of cocoa growing regions to basically source the beans and then, on small scale, so maybe a few kilos at a time, kind of how do you convert those into chocolate? And I think it really kind of mirrored, the interest in coffee that happened kind of, before that, where, people started really getting interested in the regional varieties and the kind of unique flavors of coffee that can be teased out when kind of working on small batch and really kind of doing your best to accentuate the characteristics of a specific region. Yeah, so I think it's really similar with chocolate where, every region of cocoa has such distinct flavors. So I think like, common ones are like Madagascar. They grow, cocoa that's got like kind of really kind of fruity, like bright red fruit, almost like raspberries is like always what I think it tastes like a little bit. And then there's like places like Ecuador, they often grow what is like a much more kind of mild and like almost a little bit floral cocoa. Yeah, so I think it was kind of, people started to kind of recognize that there was all this complexity and interesting kind of flavors that can be teased out of chocolate when it's not processed as like a commodity food stuff, but it's kind of, done on a much smaller scale, a little bit more intentionally. Yeah, and so then I think in like the 20 aughts, yeah, I think it kind of started to gain traction. And at the time I was living in Portland, Oregon, where there was a couple of different companies that started doing this type of work. And it was really fun because, at that point, there was really only equipment produced for like really large scale, like multiple metric ton production. And then, a couple of companies that maybe started to make some stuff for like kind of the home chocolate maker to make like, I don't know, not really small quantities. And there was definitely kind of a gap in between. And so it's kind of fun because there was a lot of experimenting and making equipment to try and kind of get to where you want to go. So there's a lot of kind of, I don't know, kind of hacking together and engineering, weird piece of equipment to do kind of all the processes on, maybe tens of kilos or kind of maybe 100 kilo scale. It's not so much 100, but yeah, tens of kilos. Yeah, and just kind of, I guess it was just exciting because it was like just a really experimental, lots of problem solving, and I think people constantly just figuring out new and interesting ways to try and tease new flavors and different types of things out of chocolate. Yeah, so that was really cool. And then kind of as I was working at that time, I think I was relatively young, and I think there wasn't too many people, kind of working or doing the bean to bar chocolate making, but there was a lot of interest by cocoa farmers, kind of in cocoa growing regions to basically learn to make chocolate themselves from their beans so that rather than exporting beans, they could just export, chocolate, which I think they could get better prices for. Yeah, and so I ended up spending a bit of time in Fiji and then the Caribbean as well, working with a couple of different farmers cooperatives and companies, kind of helping them learn how to make chocolate from their beans. Yeah, and that was really fun. I guess it was kind of that same thing that I've always found that interest in is that going further and further back, earlier and earlier to the source was so cool. And so it was so fun to like go to these regions, basically see how cocoa trees are grown and how you can do that. And then once you harvest the cocoa, you have to ferment it. And so this is a really big impact in the final flavor. It's basically where you're making all of the precursors that will become the chocolate flavor happens in the fermentation. And so it's really cool to kind of see and start to understand like how much impact that has on the process. Yeah, and then I think that really kind of helped inform more of kind of what comes downstream to me of how to kind of, I don't know. I think chocolate makers often kind of think about and talk about that it's like you're essentially just trying to do as little, I don't know, damage, or you're trying to reduce as much as possible from there forward, where it's like you let the tree and the fermentation kind of give you this kind of bountiful kind of collection of flavors and all these precursors, and you're essentially trying to, from there just tease out what you want without kind of, ruining what the tree has given you. yeah, so it was a really fun time. I think I still kind of do a little bit in chocolate and would
Mhm.
certainly love to do more. So it's always something I don't know, kind of keeping an eye out for because it just, I don't know, it does get me excited. So it would be fun to kind of, get to do more of it.
Yeah, well, I think that's really interesting because I see that kind of that trend that you're describing with the chocolate industry. It seems like it happens or it happened, I mean, in like a lot of different fields in the kind of early 2000s where it was like before that it was kind of growing up to this point where like these bigger corporations were kind of just controlling the market in a way where they were trying to push out a product as quickly and like efficiently as possible. And then there kind of was like that bubble that broke where it started trying to give back the production to like the actual people who are responsible for its making. And I really think that that's cool. Sort of like the first principles thinking that you're describing, where it's like, what's the farthest back that we can go to like still extract more knowledge from this of how to do this better. And I think that that's really cool. And so like maybe you could talk a little bit because of like what we've been, you know, what you've been describing with the chocolate industry, maybe just like the power of being able to kind of democratize an industry like that and really kind of give the power of production back to like the various rungs of the ladder.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I think I guess it's such a big topic, but yeah, I think it is cool. I think, and with something like the cocoa industry, certainly I think there's a lot of big problems to solve there. And I don't know that, kind of all the bean to bar chocolate making is such a small industry. I don't know how big of an
Mhm.
impact it has on the average cocoa farmer, but I think it is really inspiring that, I think a lot of the people I know kind of with companies, they work directly with farmers, have often gone to the country of origin and seen
Mhm.
the farms where their cocoa is being grown and comes from, and have a much more, I guess, direct and stronger relationship with the producers and the farmers, to then, bring the cocoa beans to the US where they then process them into chocolate. Um, yeah, and I guess it is. I guess you are reducing just the number of, I guess, middlemen in that process, and I think building a lot more direct relationships so that it is a much more human interaction.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so I think I guess just generally, I think that is a good thing, as much as possible when we can do it. So, yeah, I know that. Yeah, I guess I feel like that is such a big, I don't know, a big topic that I feel like there is maybe probably a lot more to be said there, but I might have to think on it a little more before expanding too much on it.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of like as we start wrapping up here, I do want to kind of pick your brain on like I guess the big topic of all of what we've been talking about. And I kind of like ask this in various forms to my guests who come on here. But in this instance specifically, how do you kind of see the convergence of like the different things that you've done throughout your careers with chocolate, with woodworking, with teaching? As kind of playing into each other and working towards who you were and who you are going into the future.
Yeah, yeah. I guess a lot of it, I guess I'm noticing more and more does often come back to like community building. And I it's like the sharing of knowledge, and I think how
Hmm.
that helps in community building. Um, Yeah, and I guess it kind of comes through in so many ways where it's like, even in woodworking, I think even early on in my woodworking, I didn't really know other woodworkers. Um, but so much of like what I got and or kind of so much of what I learned came from books and other knowledge that I think
Hmm.
had been accumulated by other people over hundreds of years. And basically trying to understand that knowledge to kind of use myself. And then I guess now, years later, kind of just beginning to feel like I've synthesized that and kind of understand that enough to kind of share it with others. Um, and so I guess really, yeah, maybe it comes back more to almost like trying to understand what people who have come before us have learned and the problems they've solved. And I just being open and listening to that. And then
Hmm.
basically, how do you take that and build from there? Because I think kind of like that in woodworking, like I was just talking about. Yeah, I think especially in like chemistry, it is interesting so much of like going into old chemistry literature and looking at these papers from like, 80 years ago where someone solved some weird random problem that like you've been stumped on for weeks and weeks, and you're just like, oh, someone literally did this 80 years ago. They already figured this out. And I guess just now, I think there's so much of that I think now I've just started starting to get into making my own milk paint, which is a traditional style of paint often used on like Windsor chairs and that type of stuff. And it is like such interesting kind of like these old things that people have solved where the knowledge has been maybe a little bit lost, but it's out there if you look. And so I guess maybe, I guess it is kind of, learning what we can from the past and then figuring out maybe how to better apply it to our future. And not to say that everything's old or that has been under the past is inherently better, but I think it is worthwhile to learn those things and understand what you can from it to see how to apply that better in the future rather than having to kind of completely relearn all of these lessons over and over again. I guess is maybe a common theme and maybe something I've been, kind of over the years, kind of maybe unknowingly, I think commonly doing is trying to learn that to solve new and different problems, kind of harnessing as much knowledge as people have already figured out as possible.
Well, thank you, Duncan, for coming on. This was great. I really loved getting to talk to you about all the different stuff that you're doing. I find it so interesting whenever I can talk with people who are doing things that like I find a lot of interest in, but I don't really have like the skill to do myself just because I haven't put the time into doing it. And I was looking through all your stuff kind of today in preparation for this talk, and I'm really in love with like especially the woodworking that you do. I think that the chairs look awesome, and you don't need me to tell you, but just keep doing what you're doing. I think it's really great. But could you tell people where to find what you're doing?
I have kind of maybe an inconsistent presence on the internet. But I guess I have a YouTube. I think it's just my name, Duncan Ellinwood. It'll come up. I guess YouTube, and then I guess probably Substack are where I'm the most active these days. I think, just my name on both of those, and it should come up. I think I was just thinking today, actually, I got my camera out and was hoping to maybe work on some more videos just because it's been a little while, but I feel like it's so dark and gray here this time of year that it's kind of hard to get into good shots. So probably nothing too major new video wise until the spring once I get a little bit more daylight. But certainly hoping to make some more videos because it's a lot of fun to try and capture the process of woodworking. And then similarly haven't had as much time to write kind of on Substack as I would like to recently, but it's another thing that's kind of a goal is to find the time again to do a little bit more of that. So
great. Well, thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was fun to chat, so I appreciate it. And likewise, I think it's a cool podcast, so I think keep it up as well. So